Hey, this is Joe Quinn from Just Fruits and Exotics. I want to talk a little bit today about pruning trees. This is February the 11th. This is the time of year you want to get out there and prune those fruit trees to make sure that you have the best possible structure for your tree and get the best possible crop as a result. But before we do any kind of pruning, we actually want to talk about some of the fundamentals of pruning. One of the things we talk about is the three Ds. That's your dead, diseased, and damaged branches. So we're going to look for those and see if there's any of that in here. If it is, we'll remove that first. The second thing we'll do is we'll actually do what's called a height prune. That's where we want to determine the height of the tree, which you can see from our pruning from last year. Everything has been whitewashed in white. We're going to take out much of what's above that area. And the reason for that is because apple trees actually produce on the first through the third year wood, generally speaking. And so we want to take out some of the new growth, but leave the old growth where those fruit spurs are going to exist. So again, we're going to get into actually doing the height prune, and then later we'll do the detail prune, and we'll talk about cross branches, branches that grow towards the center of the tree, and branches that are maybe a little bit leggy and need to be taken off from the outside of the tree. All right, so first thing we want to do is get a height prune and kind of open up the center of this tree. This space in here, you can kind of see, it's going to look kind of like a chalice, like a cup. So you want the inside of the tree, these fingers, of course, being the branches, to form this kind of cup. And the reason you want to do that is you want to allow both light penetration and air penetration. One of the big problems we have here in Florida is we have very high humidity values in the summertime. As a result of that, a lot of our trees are actually subject to fungus diseases and various other things that result from staying wet too much. So we want to make sure we get air penetration and everything else to dry it out, and also give the fruit as much opportunity as possible to soak up some of the sun for ripening. So I'm going to go back to this. As you see, what you'll see me do here is try to remove some of the pieces that are in the center of the tree first, and then I'm going to actually take the top out and create sort of a flat top appearance. But mainly what I want to leave here is the outside or ring, those fingers of the tree. And you see we're actually a little bit early this year on getting some of the blooms. We had a very strange winter this year. We started off very warm, ended up very cold in January, and then now we are in February. It looks like we're about to warm up again. But these trees already started blooming. This particular tree, by the way, is a Joy's apple. It's actually a local heirloom. It's discovered just north of Tallahassee, and it's partially self-fertile. So we have this tree, but we also have a pink lady, which we'll get to maybe in another video, and another Joy's apple that we're using. And they're within about 10 feet from each other for the purpose of making sure that we can, one, keep them small, and two, also make sure we have plenty of cross-pollination with all the bees and things we have here. So when we get back to it, and we'll talk a bit more here in a few minutes. The height prune too, you really don't have to worry too much about exactly where you cut, because you're just taking the top of the tree out. When you get into the detail prune, which is after you finish determining the height of the tree, you'll want to be a lot more particular about where you cut. And we'll talk more about, and I'll get a detailed shot here shortly, of where the buds are on the branch. You always want to trim to an outward facing bud. And the reason you want to do that is when the tree goes back to growing, it's actually going to leaf out and form a new branch where that bud is. So you want that bud to face outward to create more of that rounded shape, more of a compact, dense growth for the tree. So it's easier to collect the fruit. You don't have to have a ladder. It's good for the tree because it's got good light and air penetration. And it takes up less space, so you can actually have more trees on your property. right, so as you can see here, what we've done now, we've taken the height out of the tree. This is again called the height prune. The purpose of this is to try to keep the tree down in control, in an area that's comfortable for you to reach. There's no set rules that say how high you have to trim your tree, but I do it so that my wife and I can comfortably, hopefully, reach the fruit when it actually is ripe. So again, the height prune is what we've done now. The next step we're going to get into is actually going to be um, doing your outward facing buds. So we're going to take a look at that, and then we're going to get into what's dead, diseased, and dying or damaged. And that'll be any branches that maybe have died over the wintertime, anything that may look like it has a bug or a fungus or anything like that on it, diseased. And then the last stage of this, before we finish up, is going to be looking at, do we have branches that are crossing? Branches that cross oftentimes when the wind blows, they'll rub against each other. They'll cause kind of open wounds on these trees, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. Also, again, if you have cross branches and you have something fall, or you have a branch that gets too heavy with fruit, it can actually cause a branch to break off. So, all right, we'll take a look here in just a minute on the outward facing buds. Okay, so we talk about outward facing buds, and the purpose of this is to encourage the tree to grow outward from the center of the tree instead of up. This is a bud that I've selected right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut about a 1/4 inch above this bud, so that when this tree actually comes out of dormancy, you're going to see branches come out this direction instead of up. This will also help thicken the branches as I keep them shorter. They won't get as leggy, and you'll get more budwood next year from the pruning we do this year. But as you can see, we already have quite a few flowers, and hopefully we'll get fruit this year. So that's where we're going to go. I'm going to go ahead and prune that off right there. And you see that I'm going to do it at a 45-degree angle in such a way that this will give it a nice callus, it'll heal up nicely, and then this bud here will be the next one to grow outward. All right, so the next thing I want to do in this process is take a look at what's going on the inside of the tree. In addition to finding your dead, diseased, damaged branches, which we've already done, we've also kind of gone around the perimeter of the tree and determined the width of the tree. It's not so important that the tree is really kept too narrow. It's just a matter of the fact that when you have fruit on a tree, it tends to make the branches kind of weak, especially if they're long and leggy, and that a lot of times that happens. And you don't want fruit on those outer branches like that. So I try to keep it a little bit shorter. The other thing to keep in mind is that from the center of the tree, when this thing is full of leaves, light's really only going to penetrate about 3 feet or about an arm's width from the outside of the tree into the tree. So you want to focus your work on preserving those branches that are in that outer rim of the tree as much as possible. So the very next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on the inside again to promote that airflow and also light penetration. As you can see here, there's quite a few branches that have just gone kind of wonky. This one here, as you can see, is actually crossing this bigger branch underneath, and this could actually cause a problem later. So what I'm going to do is these type of branches, I'm going to remove those off. And you want to make sure you cut these as close to flush with the branch as possible to kind of promote a good scab there and avoid any kind of disease. In addition to that, you also want to find any branches that maybe grow very vertically. Vertical growing branches are not ideal. The branches that you really want to have your fruit develop on are going to be branches that ideally hang about a 45-degree angle, as far as 45-degree angle to the ground. If they're too vertical, they're just vertical sucker growth, vigorous growth. A lot of times they won't really produce any fruit wood or budwood anyway. So it's better to go ahead and cut those out. All right, so here we are. We've taken a Joy's apple tree here. We've created a height prune. We have kind of shaped the outside perimeter of the trees, identified some of those leggy branches that we wanted to cut off just a little bit and try to prevent them from breaking later. we've gone to the inside of the tree. We've removed a lot of the small new growth, the very vigorous small greenwood. We've also taken out branches that have been crossed, where you have possible areas where they would rub together in case of a windstorm or whatever. We do live in Florida, we get hurricanes, and of course that could do its own damage to trees. And we've also kind of identified which branches we want to have fruit, which ones are doing well, which ones are a little sickly. We've taken those out, dead limbs, taken out again broken branches, things of that sort. So that's pretty much it. We've taken on the Joy's apple here. I think we've got it ready to go for this season. We won't have to do it again till this time next year. Now, some trees, just to think about, like your prunus varieties, such as your peaches, nectarines, plums, apricots, you may actually want to once or twice during the summertime give them a height prune, which is the first step that we did here, just to kind of bring them down a little bit because they can be very vigorous growers. I've easily cut 4 to 6 feet out of a peach tree in a season so far, and it wouldn't be surprised to have to do that again this year. But the apples don't grow quite as quickly, so usually you can get away with 1 prune for the apple tree, and then it'll be good to go. We've already talked about mulching this season, and come March we'll be starting to feed, and here we go, back to another fruit season. So anyway, guys, thanks for joining me on this. I just wanted to show you how we're doing it here at Quinn Farms, and go over that a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about some other trees when that time comes around. But until next time, don't just landscape, fruitscape.